This is a prologue for the What's Your Story? Grand Illuminations conversation. Everybody wants a good life. Why not? The only real questions are what one looks like and how best to put one together. Now, when it comes to the former, lots of people are apt to say that a good life ultimately comes down to being happy. Just ask any random St. Ben's and St. John parent what they wish for their beloved child, and odds are they'll say something along the lines of, "I just want my child to be happy." But then ask what happiness means, and lots of people are likely to miss the mark in one way or another. For instance, people may cast happiness as a pleasant feeling, the way we attest to feeling happy on any given day, with a happy life being a matter of stringing as many happy days together as possible. More is better, and an endless string of happy days is best. 2 thumbs up for as many happy days as possible. Plenty of contemporary articles about self-care and wellness emphasize achieving a contented, stress-free state of mind, whether through meditation, mindfulness, or some other be kind to yourself practice. Fair enough. But a pleasant state of mind, welcome as it is, isn't all we're after when we yearn for a good life. There's more to the notion than just feeling a certain way. For one thing, when thinking about the idea of feeling good, something everyone obviously wants, it's easy to oversimplify and mischaracterize the experience. For instance, I thoroughly enjoy my daughters. I take sweet pleasure from being around them, and I miss them dearly when we're far apart. Without a doubt, more of their company is better for me. But the truth is that I only feel this way because I love them in the first place. I don't love them because I take pleasure in their company. I take pleasure in their company because I love them. Mind you, it's always a wise idea to get cause and effect relationships correct. And the same is so for knowing the difference between things being associated and being identical. The real point when it comes to my daughters isn't just pleasure. After all, if you could measure my abundant pleasure from their company and offer me a bigger dose pharmaceutically, so X pleasant feelings from my daughters and X plus 1 from a little blue pill, I wouldn't opt for the dope. You wouldn't either. Not when it comes to people you truly care about. Pleasure itself isn't the real target in this picture. It's basically a result or side effect, not the thing I'm chasing directly, with my daughters being just a reliable means to procure my fix. Truth is that love beats pleasure in this scenario, and the kind of pleasure you anticipate is the sort that comes with the territory, as distinct from it being the goal. You fully expect to enjoy people you love, but the love and the pleasure aren't identical. For another thing, some of the most important things for lots of lives, and I mean important in the sense of what particular people living a given life deem important, can be hard and painful. Not the sorts of things that necessarily keep someone feeling good and whistling merrily all the time. People can lose loved ones. Their loved ones can suffer terribly, and people's lives can orbit around pursuits and causes that are anything but perfectly smooth and pleasant sailing. Beating back the hostile invaders, finding a vital cure, or eradicating injustice can be a real bear. Maybe the last thing you want to do, but also the thing you feel you absolutely must do, under pain of not being true to yourself. If you're tempted to say that in such cases people simply hitch their wagons to the wrong people and pursuits, ones with an inadequate payout of pleasant mental states, don't expect people with these attachments and commitments to see it this way. Once again, love beats pleasure. And for that matter, so can a sense of duty, which isn't to say we don't want pleasure, but simply that pleasure isn't the one and true sun around which most lives orbit, not if people know what's good for them. To be honest, happiness can be overrated, at least as people often think of it. Don't get me wrong. Lives devoid of pleasure or filled with abject suffering are miserable lives. And who would ever want one of those? But so long as you think of a happy life primarily or exclusively in terms of enjoying pleasant mental states, you'll confuse a tree for the forest. We certainly don't wish to suffer, and we sensibly prefer pleasant experiences, lots of them. But most human beings also embrace beloved people, pursuits, and personal ideals that effectively define them. And these people, pursuits, and personal ideals can sometimes render life really hard. Sticking by the people we love, accomplishing what we set out to do, and being the person we wish to be, just so we can honestly live with ourselves at the end of the day, can all be tough roads to hoe. And our reach may just exceed our grasp. Sadly, we may not even come close. In this case, we invariably suffer for it. So, you might ask, why do we ever willingly take the difficult road instead of finding some easier way around all the tough stuff in life? Well, we want our lives to have meaning. And our sense of meaning invariably comes from making sense of our life as a kind of story, some of which we're bound to inherit and other parts we discover or construct along the way. For instance, you don't get to define what it means to be a good shortstop, saxophonist, or scientist. Ultimately, the world tells you whether you make the cut in terms of being any good at these things. If you can't catch the ball, but you insist you're a heck of a shortstop, then effectively Don Quixote playing short today, and nobody's taking Donnie seriously as a ball player. Then again, maybe you come from a long line of great shortstops, but you discover early on that the saxophone or science is the thing that really calls your name. In this case, the story that was supposed to be yours, carrying on the illustrious family baseball tradition, may leave you cold. And you may disappoint and even shock people by taking to the sax or science instead of swiftly turning double plays. And sometimes our story is less a case of sheer discovery and more a case of gradually putting one together over time, a work in progress that can include twists and turns we can't quite anticipate, so that what we expect our lives to look like at 20 isn't what we find at 40 and may be different still at 60. Provided the story is adequate, the tale gives us a reason to carry on, to get out of bed in the morning and persevere even in the face of life's tough stuff. And when things are hard, we definitely need a good story to make adequate sense of life. If you're Sisyphus, rolling your enormous rock up the steep hill, straining with every muscle and just barely making it to the top, only to see that big old rock roll right back down to the bottom over and over again, your story can't be accomplishing the Herculean task, since it's never going to be done, not for good. What might the relevant story be for Sisyphus? Defiance? Grit? Savoring the sheer effort itself? Of course, maybe some lots in life are so bad that it's next to impossible to find some true consolation by way of finding enough meaning in the effort to make it worth it. Then again, human beings can often find consolation in the unlikeliest places. In this vein, the Finns embrace a wonderful ideal they refer to as sisu. It's not so easy to translate into English. Some Finns think of it as guts, along the lines of a fierce resolve to stay the course, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. It's a kind of relentless endurance, but unwavering fortitude with something of an edge to it. In November 1939, the Soviets invaded Finland, sending over 1 million troops into a little nation without the kind of formidable standing army that could possibly match the overwhelming Soviet might. And yet, the Finns shocked the Soviets with their ingenious and staunch resistance in the so-called Winter War, not so unlike Ukraine today. Both the Finnish and Ukrainian resistance recalled the fabled story of Thermopylae, where a vastly outnumbered Spartan army faced a Persian one in 480 BCE. Told by Xerxes, the Persian king, that Persian arrows would be so plentiful as to block out the sun, the Spartan leader, Leonidas, supposedly replied, "Then we shall fight in the shade." The edge in Leonidas's reply comes in the form of expressing such grim resolve with a wry smile. Of course, when it comes to telling bold stories, we can indulge in fairy tales, fanciful ones with no basis in reality. If they're good ones, people may adore them. And they often adore them precisely for how wild and unbelievable they are compared with everyday life. But what if the story we tell is our own story? And what if it's nothing more than make-believe? After all, Don Quixote fashions himself a gallant knight on a great steed, while he's really just a geezer in rusty armor on a tired old horse. His trusty second, Sancho Panza, knows the real score, but not his knight in not-so-shining armor. If a good and meaningful life were all about pleasant mental states, Don Quixote would be pretty hard to beat. Indeed, the lesson of his life would be that you should keep telling yourself whatever story about your own life sounds best to you. The problem with this strategy is that your life can end up being a great big fib. And as the story of your life goes, so you go. If your story is a lie, then so are you. This isn't to say that most of us stand much chance of living entirely true to the famous aphorism inscribed on the temple of Apollo at Delphi, "Know thyself." It's often hard to see yourself clearly, and in some ways, we're all somewhat vague by nature, meaning that, try as we might, we can't pin ourselves down entirely, no more than we can pin others down. Moreover, there's little reason to think that every story is a better one for complete accuracy. As Bill Pelfrey likes to say, if the story changes each time you tell it, but it gets a little better with each telling, so much the better. Sometimes the stories we tell about our own lives can be aspirational, stories that point where we wish to go, not exactly where we happen to be. And as long as the gap isn't too large, and so long as it doesn't settle in as nothing more than a fairy tale to pull the wool over our own eyes, we don't need every word to be absolutely true. We just need it to be true enough and to make some good sense of our lives. Of course, aside from stories not being true enough, they can also grow old. And when they do, they can unwittingly evolve into a set of shackles. For example, when I went off to college, I fully intended on being a big league pitcher. 2 years and too many wild pitches later, my college baseball coach left me off the Florida roster, stunning a young man possessed with such a big fastball. The team came back from Florida, but I never went back to practice. Honestly, I felt humiliated. What I didn't realize right away was that I'd been hanging on an identity that was no longer quite me. Without that managerial nudge, I would never have walked away from baseball, but in a way, I already had, and I just didn't know it. My story had grown old, and I needed a new one, the kind to carry me through the years ahead, even if that story would eventually need revisions too. What's your story?